Okay, so right now we still have Israel from Kadesh Barnea to the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and we mentioned a few things that had taken place as they were getting ready to go into Jericho, into the Promised Land. See here, lots of events. Let me just mention a couple things here. Of course, Moses at Kadesh Barnea, when they leave the second time from Kadesh Barnea, Moses makes a huge mistake, a big sin really, and he's snared because of his temper, and he doesn't completely obey the word of the Lord. God said, speak to the rock, and he smites the rock instead. Because of that, he is not allowed to go into the Promised Land, and as we mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 3, there's even a conversation between Moses and God saying, can I please go into the Promised Land? And God says, no, don't bring it up again, literally. Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 26 and 27, where Moses brings this up again. But the Lord was wroth with me for your sakes, and would not hear me. And the Lord said to me, let it suffice thee, speak no more unto me of this matter. Verse 25, Moses said, I pray thee, let me go over and see the good land. And the Lord said, no, don't bring it up again. So God instead said, get thee up into the top of Pisgah, and lift up thine eyes westward and northward and southward and eastward, and behold it with thine eyes, for thou shalt not go over this Jordan, but charge Joshua, and encourage him, and strengthen him, for he shall go over. So Moses, this idea that he's refused, God refused allowing him to go into the Promised Land. Here's Mount Nebo, Pisgah's lofty heights. The song says, I view my home and take my flight. Moses went from Mount Nebo to heaven. All right, but not quite yet. We'll get to that, his death and so on in just a little bit. So let me mention a few other events. We got a lot of things that are taking place as they're going from Kadesh Barnea up to the east side of Jericho. All right, another thing that takes place is that Aaron is stripped of his high priesthood. Aaron is stripped. That's another event going from Kadesh Barnea to the eastern bank of Jordan. I have capital letter G, but I don't know what you have in the number of events. If you didn't take the notes down, you're going to have to fit this in with where you're at. But Aaron is stripped of his high priesthood. God takes or tells Moses to give the priesthood from Aaron to his son Eleazar. And so Aaron then dies at the age of 123. We're in, let's see here, Numbers chapter 20. Go back to Numbers chapter 20, verse 23. Numbers 20, verse 23. Lord speaking to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor by the coast on the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered unto his people. And again, I like Bible geography. I like the maps. So he's somewhere down here in this dry area, the coast or the border. The word coast there doesn't mean a sea coast like we think of. It's not it's not the coast of the Dead Sea or anything. The coast simply means the border. He's by the border of Edom, I believe it says. The coast of the land of Edom. Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word. So Moses and Aaron suffered this fate because of their rebellion. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up unto Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments. So here again we see this passing on of the priesthood from Aaron to his son. And by the way, this would be a continued event all the way until literally the coming of Jesus Christ. Passing on the priesthood to another high priest. Now, there were times where it was very illegitimate. It was paid for, bought and bribed and paid for. But there were, at least all the way through the Old Testament times and into the time between the Testaments, it was legitimate. There were actual priesthoods high priesthoods, that it was passed down from generation to generation. And this is the beginning of that. Okay, next event. There's a serpent problem that's solved. A serpent problem. Israel is rebelling in chapter 21. Chapter 21 and verse number 3, the Lord hearkened the voice of Israel, delivered the Canaanites. Actually, it's the next verse, verse 4. And they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to compass the land of Edom. Now, I've not been down in this area of Edom. I've seen a lot of pictures of it. And it's very rugged, very mountainous. Mount Hor, H-O-R. Where is that? There's a lot of debate over, there's a number of mountain peaks along this range here. And again, remember that this whole area through here, this is a, what do you call it? It's a fault line of an earthquake. And so there's mountains on both sides, and there's, of course, this vastly deep Jordan Valley, and the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth. So all of this is on a fault line. And so there's mountains that literally run right next to this very, very deep fault line. So all of these mountains, so there's a lot of debate over which one of those mountains is Mount Hor. But it's definitely one of these down here to the south of Edom. There's a famous city there today, carved out of the rocks, called Petra. Literally means rock. And so that's a city surrounded by mountains as well, mountains of rock. So it's an interesting place. And I guess none of you have been there, right? No. So I was talking to somebody just recently who went to Israel. I think it was over in Hawaii, of all things. And they had just, a while back, had gone to Israel and did get to go to Petra and Egypt and these places that we didn't see. But so Mount Hor is mentioned here in verse number 4. But what does it say? They wanted to compass or go around the land of Edom, and the soul of the people was much discouraged because of the way, and the people spake against God and against Moses. Wherefore have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness, where there is no bread, neither is there any water, and our soul loatheth this light bread. We hate, we're disgusted, the word loathe. We're disgusted by this bread. What bread? The manna from heaven. The bread that Jesus referred to in John chapter 6 is bread from heaven. We're tired of it. We're disgusted by it. And it's light bread. And God didn't take that lightly. The Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against thee. Pray unto the Lord that he take away the serpents from us. And Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole, and came to pass that if a serpent had bitten a man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Where's the fiery serpent? It's a serpent of brass. Why does the Bible call it a fiery serpent? John chapter 3 mentions this again, right? John 3:14. Okay, was it on fire or what? Okay. Do you think when you looked at it, was it burning? Okay, if it was brass, it would have looked like it was burning because of the color. Davey?
I was just going to say with the sun shining on it.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Sorry?
Could have just been an image of a fiery serpent.
Yeah. And, of course, it would have taken fire to shape it. Right? Don't you think so?
Yes.
Maddo doesn't think so. That's why I was asking her. I think almost certainly, you would have heated it up and then shaped it, if not actually molded it, which would, of course, take real hot fire. But anyway, so he makes this serpent of brass. Now, this serpent of brass, of course, brass is a picture of judgment. Somebody mentioned judgment. The brazen altar outside the tabernacle was made of brass. It's a picture of judgment. Jesus used this story as an illustration to win Nicodemus in John chapter 3. This serpent of brass was in existence for about 800 years. Hezekiah destroys this thing in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4. 2 Kings 18:4. I have nothing in my family heritage that is this old. And I don't know if any of you do. You know, you'd have to be probably pretty famous or somebody to have something like this. But I've seen some pretty old things. You know, I've seen the Magna Carta, one of the original Magna Carta. That's in Washington, D.C., right? Have you seen that?
I haven't seen it.
So there's some pretty old things, you know. But they had this. Of course, they're Jews, and Jews keep everything. But this is a great illustration here that God intended to use this, but it was never intended to be kept around and then worshipped. And it literally was being worshipped in the days of Hezekiah, and so he destroyed it. So this serpent problem, all they had to do was look and live. Look and live. Great illustration, and so Jesus used it. I love how Jesus used many examples from the Old Testament in his teaching. And so he knew his Bible well. Of course, the devil knows the Bible well also. The devil took some of the Bible stories and twisted them to tempt Jesus Christ. And so the devil knows the law as well. So just knowing the Bible is not enough. And Jesus used the Bible in a proper way. So there's the serpent problem. Next, the Amorites are slaughtered. The Amorites. This would come up again. We won't go into the whole story, but as they come around this side, by the way, there are many groups of people, and I have no idea how to tell them apart other than where they lived. I don't know, did they look different? I don't know. Just like today, you go to certain parts of the Middle East, generally the people look similar, but they're vastly different, you know. And you can obviously recognize Jews, Orthodox Jews, because they dress a certain way or they have their hair cut a certain way. You can recognize the Muslims, and but even the Muslims, there's a lot of different groups of them that if you or I looked at them, we'd say they're the same, and they're definitely not. And they would be, you know, those are fighting words to them. But my point is, there's Amorites and Ammonites and Hivites and Jebusites and all of these different ites that we talk about. And this group of people on this side is known as the Amorites. They're also known as Moabites or Ammonites, I believe. But a broad name for them is the Amorites. And later on, Jephthah will come along as one of the judges of Israel, and he will say, he'll have this political, diplomatic discussion between Israel and the Amorites. And so it's an interesting discussion. I'm not going to go into it now. But as of this point, Israel, because the Amorites refused Israel's passage, Israel comes out and wins a great victory. Chapter 21, verse 21. Israel sent messengers unto Sihon, king of the Amorites, saying, let me pass through. And they said, oh, no, you're not passing through our land. And they actually came out to battle against them. And so they slaughtered the Amorites. All right, next, let's move to this interesting story of Balaam, chapter 22. A perverted prophet. A perverted prophet. All right, you know the story, the general story, but let's look at a few points concerning Balaam. Children of Israel are passing through this area of Edom and coming north. And so they ask passage of the Moabites. And the king of Moab, his name is Balak. Balak says, wait a second, we got to do something. There's several million people coming along, and they obviously have a very strong army and a very strong God. So I need not just a bigger army to defeat them. I need a powerful prophet of a false god to come and curse these people and maybe even overcome their God. Now, it's kind of ridiculous for us to think about, I don't think this way. I think whoever has the biggest army and the strongest missiles, and, that's who's going to win. But very much so in their day, their thinking was that whoever was stronger in battle must have a stronger God at that time. It didn't mean that if they lost the battle, they were going to convert to their gods. But it did mean that they recognized that those gods were more powerful than their own at that time. So Balak wants to get somebody to come and curse their gods and to curse those people and on a spiritual level defeat them. It's hard for us to comprehend this, at least for me, but that was their thinking. But by the way, this created a big problem later on when nations were defeated. They would add the gods of their victors over themselves. They would add their gods to their own. That's why the Samaritans, for example, they were defeated, and the Assyrians bring in many other people from other countries, bring in their gods, and the Samaritans just combined them. They worshiped their own gods, they worshiped all of these other gods, and they thought it was okay to add the worship of other gods to literally the worship of Jehovah. They take Jehovah off his throne and bring him down to the level of many other gods and worship all of them. And they literally thought that was okay. And so that's what's happening here. The Moabites getting Balaam to come in and curse, to put a hex, a curse on the Israelites. Now, I don't know what you think of Balaam, but there's some indication, that God is speaking to Balaam, and Balaam is speaking back to God, and it almost seems to indicate that Balaam was listening to the voice of God. And I assure you that is not the case. Balaam is not a prophet of God. Balaam is a diviner. He worships false gods. He's probably from Mesopotamia or somewhere off to the north and the east. And the Bible definitely has a lot to say about Balaam. So let me just quickly summarize what the story is, and then we'll talk about it. So Balak offers Balaam a bunch of riches if he'll curse the Israelites. In chapter 22, verse 9, God specifically tells Balaam not to go. Verse 9 through 12. Verse 12, thou shalt not go with them. Thou shalt not curse the people. Don't do it. So Balaam comes out and says, I can't go. Well, they came back with more money. And Balaam says, finally God says, okay, go. But the point is, God had told him clearly, don't go with them. Don't curse the people of Israel. He ends up, where the Bible says go. God said go. But whatever, I forget the details. But the point is, God was not in approval. God was not approving of what Balaam did at all. Balaam finally agrees to go with them, and of course, on his way, that is missing. On his way, he barely escapes death himself by the hand of God's angel. This is an interesting story here of about 13, 14 verses. I won't read it all. Where the angel is standing in a pathway between the rocks. And by the way, where they're at, there's many of these. It's a very rugged area. The path would have been through the mountains. And as he's going along, he comes to a real narrow path, and the donkey stops. And of course, Balaam starts hitting the donkey. Go! And of course, the donkey refuses to go because the angel's right there. And eventually, the donkey speaks out to Balaam. And the funniest thing is that Balaam speaks back to the donkey. I cannot understand that one. One thing, really, I think the only conclusion I come to is Balaam must have been used to hearing spirits talk. And so he wasn't too surprised, when his donkey starts speaking to him. Verse 29, Balaam said unto the ass, the donkey said, what have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the ass, because thou hast mocked me. I would there were a sword in my hand, for now would I kill thee. And the ass said unto Balaam, am not I thine ass, on which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, nay. I think God has a sense of humor. He said, nay, to the donkey. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, verse 31. And he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. Now, clearly, this is the angel of God standing there with a sword. And if he would have moved, if that donkey hadn't stopped, Balaam would have been a dead man. And now Balaam sees this. And God asks the same question to the donkey. Why'd you hit the donkey these 3 times? I tried to stop you, withstand you. I told you not to come. And Balaam says, I sinned. The Lord said, go with the men, but only the word that I shall speak unto thee, that thou shalt speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. So anyway, he comes along. He doesn't end up cursing the children of Israel in the sense that he speaks out against them. Every time he opens his mouth, he blesses them. But he did other things that we find later on. There's 4 times where Balaam speaks a blessing upon the children of Israel. Let me give you the references for these 4 times. I'll read one of them. Numbers chapter 23, verse 8. 8 through 10. Here's the first one. I'll read these. How shall I curse whom God hath not cursed? Or how shall I defy whom the Lord hath not defied? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. Lo, the people shall dwell alone, and shall not be reckoned among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his. So basically, that's a blessing upon the children of Israel. I see them multiplied. They're everywhere. In Numbers chapter 23, verse 22 now through 24, he blesses them again. Numbers 23, 22 through 24. In Numbers chapter 24, verses 5 through 9, and in Numbers 24, it's right in the middle of it, so 3 times really. Numbers 24, 7, it's right in the middle of that. So, at least 3 times, God blesses the children of Israel through Balaam. Say, wow, what a good man. Balaam is used of the Lord to bless the children of Israel. From the passage itself, from the story itself, it doesn't give us much evil in Balaam. It doesn't tell us much about him. But in the New Testament, there are 3 different writers in the New Testament that talk about how terrible Balaam was. So you take their account of what Balaam was like into consideration. So let's look at those 3 accounts in the New Testament back to this story of Balaam. Let's see here. 2 Peter 2:15. I'm going to give you 3 main points also concerning the character of Balaam. 2 Peter is our first one. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse number 15. By the way, each of these are from writers in the last days of the New Testament. So here we see in 2 Peter chapter 2, I'm in 2 Timothy. No wonder. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse number 15. Let's go back a few verses to verse 12. But these as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things that they understand not, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption. These are demonic creatures, I believe. Even the angels of heaven don't bring railing accusation against them before the Lord. These are demonic beasts. Verse 13, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they that count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Spots they are and blemishes, sporting themselves with their own deceivings while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls. In heart they have exercised with covetous practices. Cursed children, So obviously very wicked people or creatures, whatever they are. Verse 15, which have forsaken the right way and are gone astray, following the way of Balaam the son of Bozor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. This is what I call the way of Balaam. This is where we see the way of Balaam. What is the way of Balaam? He'll do anything for money. He'll do anything to please himself. He'll push against God until he gets what he wants. That's really what Balaam did. He pushed against God. No, I want to go. I want their wages of unrighteousness. I want their money. And he pushed until God said, well, go. This isn't God saying, Balaam, I want you to go with them, but I want you to bless the children. No. This is Balaam getting his way. And the way of Balaam is he'll do anything to make himself happy. So we see here in this passage the way of Balaam. In Jude verse 11 now. Jude verse 11, we see the error of Balaam. The error of Balaam. All right, so let's read the passage. Verse 10, it's again speaking of some kind of spiritual beings. Verse 10, but these speak ill of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally is brute beasts, and those things they corrupt themselves. Woe unto them, for they have gone the way of Cain, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward. The error of Balaam for reward. Okay, an error indicates a mistake, something you did wrong. So Balaam committed an error. What was his error? I think his error, and again it doesn't list it out, but I think his error is that he believed that God was going to curse the children of Israel anyway because of their sins. And so he's coming along to curse them as well, that they deserved it. Anyway, that's some commentators' take on it. But so he assumed that they deserved the worst, but he didn't take into account the mercy of God. And so, but either way, this is his error of Balaam. So he's a person who's full of error. This is not a godly man or anything like it. Also, his doctrine, the doctrine of Balaam. Go to Revelation chapter 2. So here we have Peter, Jude, and now John giving commentary, mentioning by name Balaam. Chapter 2, verse 14. This is the church of the angel at Pergamos. I know thee, I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. Even though he had failed in his attempts to curse Israel, his corrupt suggestion that God's people mix with the Moabites was highly successful. In Numbers chapter 25, now let's go back to Numbers 25, and I'll tell you what his doctrine was. His doctrine was mixing true faith with false teachings. Numbers 25. Oh, you can keep on serving the Lord. Just intermarry with them. It's okay. Yeah, if you intermarry, you're going to bring their gods in with them. Chapter 25, verse 1. Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people in the sacrifice of their gods. And the people did eat and bow down to their gods, and Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. Why? Because of Balaam's advice. Why don't you intermarry? Why don't you... Yeah, that'll bring God's judgment upon them more quickly than anything. And so, let's go on down to verse 9. We'll skip all of the details there. Those that died in the plague were 24,000. So, 24,000 Israelites died because of tying in with Balaam. It's not just the intermarrying, it's taking in their gods. It's believing in their beliefs, their religious beliefs. All right. It's an interesting story there about Phinehas, the son of Eleazar. He took a javelin in his hand and he went after the man of Israel into the tent who had brought a Midianitish woman into the congregation. And he went after them and thrust them through their belly, the Bible says. All right, so Balaam, not a good man. Wasn't in any way following the will of God. This is a perverted prophet. And by the way, I don't even have the passage here, unless I missed it somewhere. But Balaam is also killed for his actions. Anybody see that? I don't see it here, and I should have that. I have it in my Old Testament book, but Balaam is put to death for his action as well. Never in the Bible does it give any good things about Balaam. He brought curse upon the children of Israel, even though he didn't actually curse them. Okay, so let's move on. Let's look at some more things that take place. I want to finish bringing them all the way up to the eastern side of the Jordan River, and so we need to keep on rolling. Numbers chapter 26 then tells us of the second census. There's another census, C-E-N-S-U-S, another census that takes place as they're getting closer now up here, probably up by Mount Nebo, close to where Moses is going to die. And they are told, commanded, given to take up another census. And that census totals over 600,000 again. This is about 30 years after the first one. And there's basically the same number of adults. All the adults died. And all of the young men, 20 and below, who were already alive. And of course, even some who were not even born at the first census. Many who were not even born. Those boys became the new adult male leaders. And so this second census tells us that they had replenished those soldiers in the army, for that matter. And it tells us by tribes, the greatest decrease was in Simeon's tribe, and the greatest increase was in Manasseh's tribe. Of course, Manasseh is one of the children of Joseph. And Simeon's tribe eventually would pretty much disappear. Simeon, remember Jacob wasn't too big on Simeon. What had Simeon done?
Was he one of the ones who attacked Shechem?
At Shechem, yes, absolutely. There was another one also, I forget. Levi and Simeon. But yes, and so Simeon's tribe would be surrounded by Judah and eventually pretty much disappears. All right, I'm going to give you this event. There's a number of others that are more important than this one, but let me mention this one to you. I think this is interesting. In chapter 27, we read an interesting story that takes place about 5 determined daughters. 5 determined daughters. And to summarize this, I can't even hardly say the man's name. It's something like Zelophehad. Go to chapter 27. You can read it for yourself as far as his name. Chapter 26 is a long passage with some of the generations. But then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, so on, of the son of Manasseh, the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. So this is from the tribe of Manasseh. Now, there's 5 daughters' names. One of them is Noah. Okay, that's I've always thought that was funny because I have a brother named Noah, and so give him a hard time with that. And they stood before Moses, before Eleazar the priest, before the princes, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness, and he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin and had no sons," meaning he died in the wilderness. Because of all of the adults dying, our father also died. There's 5 of us sisters. There's no one for us. We're supposed to get some family inheritance, some land, but there's no males in our family. So how are we supposed to have any inheritance? Now, what's your answer to that? Get married, right? You go get married, then you'll have inheritance. But they're going to get married within their own. Anyway, it's supposed to be that the land stays in the family name is the point. And so our father Zelophehad is going to lose his inheritance. His name won't continue. You think about, Ahab had him killed. Naboth. He lost his family name. It was a tragic thing to lose your family name and inheritance in the land of Israel. Verse 4, why should the name of our father be done away from among the family, because he hath no son? Give unto us therefore a possession among the brethren of our father. So Moses takes their cause before the Lord and said, Lord, what do I do about it? And the Lord said, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right. Thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren. Thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. And then God gives a special teaching on this topic. If a man die and have no son, verse 8, then ye shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. If ye have no daughter, ye shall give his inheritance unto his brethren. If ye have no brethren, then shall give his inheritance unto his father's brethren. If his father have no brethren, he shall give his inheritance unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family, and he shall possess it. What's the teaching here? It's the first mention of the kinsman redeemer. This is the first mention of the kinsman redeemer. And so when the story of Ruth takes place, you have father and sons dying. There's only women left. And they have no relatives, evidently, except they have no direct relatives. And so there's a kinsman, the nearest of kin, that's supposed to redeem them. Okay, so an interesting story there at the beginning of chapter 27 about 5 determined daughters. And then God uses that to teach them about the kinsman redeemer. All right, next. I've got to keep rolling. In chapter 27 also, we see a change in commanders. A change in commanders. For the first time, this is not the only time, that there's several times where Joshua is set apart. But this is the first initial choosing of Joshua. Chapter 27, verse 15. Moses speaking to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, which may go in out before them, which may lead them out, which may bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord be not as sheep which have no shepherd. And the Lord said unto Moses, take thee Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay thine hand upon him. And so you can read through the rest of the passage, but this is the first time where God clearly chooses Joshua as the new leader. I'm not going to dig into that yet because I want to give you a whole background on who Joshua was and some of his characteristics and so on. Very interesting. So, change in commanders, it's begun. It's not finalized at all, but it's definitely begun. Next, the mortification of Midian, chapter 31. The Midianites had refused Israel passage through their land, and so God says, or Moses actually says, God, what shall we do to them? And God said, you're going to destroy a lot of them. Midianites. Wait a second here. It was a Midianite that Moses was married to in the land of Midian. Now there's many, obviously, thousands of Midianites. Later on we see, they didn't destroy all of them, by the way. They just destroyed some of them. But the Midianites were descendants of Abraham through one of his other wives, other than Sarah, Keturah. And so Genesis chapter 25 mentions that. But this tribe had become like any of the other pagan desert tribes. And they were warriors. They had lots of warriors, and they were very much rebellious against the Lord. Okay, so the Midianites, they actually choose 12,000 choice warriors from each of Israel's 12 tribes. 1,000 from each of the tribes. Total of 12,000 soldiers, and they fight against the Midianites, destroy a lot of them. In the days of the Judges, we see the Midianites coming up again when it's Gideon defeating the Midianites. Remember, there's 135,000 Midianite soldiers that he defeats with only 300. Okay, one last thing that we'll mention that's mentioned in chapter 35 of the book of Numbers. Numbers chapter 35. I want to mention here the cities given to the Levites, and as a part of that, the cities of refuge. Cities given to the Levites. The Levites' possession. The tribe of Levi is the only tribe that would have their land given to them before they got into the land of Canaan. Where we see before they get there, it's divided. They said, you're going to get these cities. Now, they didn't have land per se. They didn't have an actual tribal area. But they were scattered throughout the land of Israel. And so this is the only tribe that it was announced to them what they would have as a possession before they went in. Chapter 35, verse 2, it says, Command the children of Israel, they give unto the Levites of the inheritance of their possessions cities to dwell in. And it talks about those cities and what they're going to be like. And then it goes a little bit more detail. Verse 13, and of these cities which ye shall give, 6 cities shall ye have for refuge. 6 cities of refuge that would be chosen out before they even went into the land. I think that's interesting. Man, if you were a part of the army attacking any of these cities that were already named, you know you're going to win. That's the great thing. Guess all of the cities in the land of Canaan. You know you're going to win. You have God on your side. God intends for you to destroy them. So just go do it. So anyway, here they are. It mentions then these 6 cities, and it actually names them out. And it tells, does it name them out here? Maybe it doesn't do it right here. Sorry, I told you wrong there. No, it doesn't name them. No, it doesn't name them here. Let me mention some things about these cities, though. These 6 cities are part of the 48 cities given to the Levites. These 6 cities are designated as refuge for accidental manslayers. Accidental manslayers. You say, well, what if you intentionally killed somebody? Couldn't you then claim that it was an accident and you could go to a city of refuge? Well, the system took care of that. If you intentionally killed somebody and you showed up a city of refuge and you said, you're going to have a trial. Okay, so they're going to try you, and the judges are going to determine if you're guilty or not. And what do the judges have? Besides the evidence, they also have the lot. Okay? They are going to find out. Ask Achan if they found out. Okay? They used the lot. They found out who was right and who was wrong, who was guilty and who was not. And they took the guilty party. So if you had intentionally killed somebody, you would never want to go to a city of refuge because you're not coming out. If they're right, if they're close to God and if they're being led of God, they're going to do the right thing. They're going to find you out. So you didn't go to a city of refuge. The only way you went to a city of refuge is if you actually were, it was an accident. You happened to hurt somebody. Your animal happened to get out and kill somebody. And now the relatives, the people who owned it are going to come after you. Or if you happen to kill somebody by running into them, running over them, and the relatives coming after you, then you would flee to a city of refuge and say, I didn't mean to do that. It was an accident. And then they would find out, of course, that it was that you were right. So these are 6 cities of refuge for accidental manslayers. The manslayer was safe as long as he remained in one of these 6 cities until the death of the high priest. At that point, he could safely return home. So, all right, you say, well, what if that'd be real bad luck, right? If you happen to kill somebody. Well, the point is, be careful. Be careful. Treat each other carefully. Don't do things that put you in danger of killing somebody. So these cities of refuge and cities of the Levites are announced that there be 48 of them given here to the Levites. So Israel has come now to the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And probably these last few chapters, what we've read here and looked at, all of this happens on the east bank of Jordan. Probably for sure, the book of Deuteronomy, all of this is written here on the east bank of the Jordan River. It's written in a very short amount of time. Most people think Deuteronomy is written in a few months. And probably all of it was written here at the east bank of Jordan. So they're ready to go in. They've got some details to take care of. Moses is going to die. And Joshua has to be officially anointed, and the ceremony taking place of transferring authority from Moses to Joshua and so on. And so that's our next main point here, is Israel on the east side of the Jordan River. And this is the book of Deuteronomy. Israel on the east side of the Jordan River. So the book of Deuteronomy that's our next book that we're going to look at. We're not going to take nearly as long, don't worry. We'll have just a little bit, and we'll quickly go through the book of Deuteronomy and then start into Joshua. Okay, so let's hold that for the next class period, and that, of course, will be on Monday.